Hey guys, welcome to class. Today what we're going to take a look at is lesson 3. So we're going to take a look at, now that we've got a basic idea of kind of how to work with some of the different tools, how to start creating shapes and actually build something out of it. So there's a little sample I have up on the screen there of what kind of we're going to be taking a look at. There are start files for today. So we're going to take a look at is accessing the start files, getting them downloaded. Instead of opening a file, we're actually going to create a new document today. So we'll take a look at new document setups, that type of thing. And then we're going to work with a couple of different tools, some shape tools, that type of thing. And then there's gonna be a couple other little things cooked into the lesson today, like tracing, just stuff that's real like simple, but it's really powerful. Like you can get a lot of use out of it, stuff that I use all the time. So if you guys want to take a second to get into Blackboard, I'm gonna share my screen out to you and we'll get started. All right, so first thing we're going to do is jump into Blackboard. So hopefully by now, like you've kind of gotten a little more familiar with how the layout and everything looks. When you first land, it's going to drop you into the announcements page. And again, that's where I'll have all the stuff that's upcoming. So what we'll be doing, a link to the demo or the lesson that we just did, and then what we'll be doing kind of the next week. Remember, for each one of these, you'll see what's going to be due, what we're going to be working on, and then again, rolling into the next week, what we'll take a look at. So what we're going to start with today is under weekly assignments. That's where I'm going to keep everything until we kind of get through all these. Then we'll jump into that projects phase. So if you click on lesson 3, that's where we're going to take a look at. There's a couple of videos here, but the first thing I want to do is I'm just going to grab the start files. I have those in there as just kind of reference. Those are real specific to tools. But what I want to do is I want to take a look at my downloads folder. Just pull this up in the Finder. And here's my lesson 3 files. If I double click it, it just unzips it into a folder. And I've got a couple different things I'm working with here. So I've got this artwork.ai. So this is some stuff that I'm going to be opening and kind of copying and pasting over. I've got this lemon, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to trace this thing. We're not going to trace it using any tools. We're going to use it actually using a command inside Illustrator. It can take any object and trace it, refine it, simplify it. It's really powerful. I use it for tracing logos. Like if I have something that's submitted to me from a client, they don't have like a high res, I can actually take an Illustrator, use that trace command, clean it up a little bit, and then end up with a real like nice finished version of it. And then we've got this postcard, and this is just kind of a sample of what the finished file might look like. Well, yours will probably look different because we'll be creating these as kind of like custom files. So that's what we're going to be starting off with. And then back inside here, there's a couple different things, a review of how to save for web, and then the extension project. So when we're done with this week's lesson, we'll take a look at that extension project, and I have a real quick example for you. So if you want to jump into Illustrator, that's where we're going to start. Now, we're not going to open up any documents. We're actually going to create a new one. So if you go up to your File menu and do a File New command, or you can see there's some quick ones. So like if you want to do a postcard, a layout for an iPhone, a layout for TV. There's all sorts of presets built into this, but what we're going to be building is something custom today. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit my little Create New button, or I can do File New up here. And it's going to pop up in this dialog window, which is going to ask me basically what it is I want to create. So if you take a look, there's recent items. There's also all sorts of kind of like simple like base layouts. So notice like these are all for print here, for mobile devices, for screen, film and video. So these are all real like common standardized layout sizes that are all kind of cooked right into the start point of Illustrator. But what we're going to do is we're going to build something for print. And what I want to do is I want to take a look at kind of what these settings look like along the right-hand side here and how I can kind of customize them. When you're laying out for print, there's two different ways. You can measure pages in points or in inches. I've always preferred inches just because that's how the page is being printed. So it gives me kind of a better sense of sizing. So for my drop down here, I'm going to select from points. I'm going to set this to inches. And 8.5 by 11, that's a standard page. We're going to change ours. We're going to set our width to 6 inches. We're going to set our height to 4.25 inches. And that's just like a standard postcard size. Now it shows orientation. It's going to automatically orient to 6 inches wide. Now we can also set how many artboards. We're going to have a whole lesson on artboards. For right now, we're just going to use one. But you can set up multiple pages within a document, and they can all be different sizes, which is kind of nice. Next part down is bleed. Bleed is just excess space that's cooked into the document. So if you're creating something, so like you can even see here on these like pages, how there's yellow color all the way to the edge. Well, if you wanted yellow or any color all the way to the edge of your document, you need to provide extra color, because then what happens is when the printer gets it, they actually print more area. They print to that bleed area, and then they cut in a little bit. So it always makes sure that there's like nice solid color all the way to the edge. There isn't kind of like a hairline of white. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click up once, and because I have this little lock icon selected, it's going to show 0.125 inches. That's an eighth of an inch. That's standard size bleed for any document that's under 11 by 17. Once you start getting bigger into like poster size or bigger documents, you always have to have more bleed just because there's more wiggle room as they print them. Now down below there's color mode, effects. So because we're doing print, we're going to work in CMYK. Anytime anything comes off of a printer, that's the mode you want to work in. CMYK is short for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Those are the 4 process colors. So like your printer that you have at home or any printer that you like use in a library or whatever, those are the different colors of ink that are inside of there. So those colors added together make up all the colors in the spectrum. RGB is red, green, blue. Those are colors of light. That's what you'd use for anything for screen. So like film and video, anything for mobile, anything for the web. That's the color standard that we'd use for that. So because we're working for print, we want to work in CMYK color space. So kind of a long way of getting through this, but once you kind of get used to it, really all you need to think about is if you're working for screen or for print, and then that's going to tell you everything you need to know. Inches or pixels, whether or not you need bleed, what your color mode is, and then the last thing is this effects. What this does is this sets a resolution. So when you're doing stuff for print, you always set it really high. If you think about it, like you can take like a magnifying glass to a printed piece and look at it in detail. You don't take a magnifying glass to a screen. So when you're doing anything for mobile, for screen, for video, 72 is going to be your number. So there's kind of 2 different standards, whether it's CMYK or RGB, inches or pixels, and then what their resolution is going to be. Notice when you go through these 2, it'll auto adjust these as you click on the different presets to the proper settings. So now that I got all my settings correct, I'm just going to create, and I'm going to start off with a new blank document. Now, earlier how I said something about like how we add that bleed, that little red line that's running around the edges, that's our bleed. So anytime we design anything for bleed, we want it to come all the way off the edge of the white space, off the artboard, and all the way to that red line, just so that if this does get printed, that we have enough space for everything. So again, as I'm going through this stuff, if you guys have any questions, fire away, whether you want to drop them into the chat or if you just want to ask them, no big deal. Don't feel like you're interrupting me. Just want to make sure everybody's kind of familiar with everything that we're doing. Now, what I want to take a look at before we get rolling is the shape tool and kind of how we're going to create some shapes. So if we take a look along the left-hand side here, we've got all these different tools. And last week we saw the selection and direct selection tool. So we could grab objects or individual points. What we're going to take a look at this week is kind of some more of this stuff. As we go throughout the course of the lessons, we'll eventually hit all of them. But you see how I've got this little rectangle tool? If I press and hold here, it's going to show me kind of a couple different ones. I've got a rectangle, I've got a rounded rectangle. So it's basically acts like squares or rectangles, but it rounds off the edges. There's this ellipse tool for making circles, ovals, that type of thing. We have a polygon tool, so you can use that for making shapes. A star tool just does basically the same thing, except for it kind of kicks in those points and makes them like stars. And then there's this flare tool, and I will be honest with you, I've never once used it for anything other than to show you guys what it is. So what I want to take a look at first is playing around with this rectangle tool and kind of seeing how it works. So what I can do is I can click and drag, and it's just going to draw a box, and it's going to apply default styles. It's going to add a fill of white and a stroke of black. Or if I just click once, I can tell it exactly how big I want something. So say I wanted like a perfect 1 inch by 1 inch box, I can do it that way as well. Now remember, when you're working on these things, you're never stuck. It's always a matter of going in and just adjusting anything that you have with the either direct select tool or selection tool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this thing and say I wanted to squish it down or make it bigger. What I want to do is I kind of want to build a bowl. We're going to kind of build some like fruit object kind of shapes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of these shapes, and by clicking on these corners, I can resize them. So right now mine's at about 3.5 by 1. And if I click and hold, it shows me that little height distance. So if I scrub left or right or up or down, I can get right in to that exact size. So I made one box that was 3.5 by 1. This one underneath here, I'm going to use this as kind of like a little platform. So I'm going to make this a little bit short. I'm going to make this about 0.15 by about 2. And if yours isn't perfect, don't worry about it. We just want to get it in the ballpark. But what we're going to do is kind of make these things into bowls. Now, what we have is kind of like these squared blocks. They don't really look too much like bowls. And when we select them with this regular selection tool, it's basically just letting us move things or rotate them or size them. So what I want to do is I want to take a look at this direct selection tool. So now if I select this thing, I can click on individual points. And remember, I could click and skew this thing way out, or notice I have this little circle here. I could click on that circle and I could drag in to add a point to it. So if I go to each point, I can do these one at a time individually, or if I click and I hold my shift key, it selects 2 points, and now if I grab them, it makes them work at the same time. Same thing applies here when I'm selecting this one underneath. When I click on it, if I click right on the edge, I can click on that circle, and because I'm using my regular selection tool, click right on the edge of the path here. And sometimes it helps if you zoom in a little bit. I can select the object, and then here, because I'm using my regular selection tool, it's not going to work with 1 point at a time. It's actually going to apply that to all 4. And now I maybe can make this a little bit skinnier, grab it from that center point, and just kind of snap it up to the bottom. And I can double click my hand to zoom out, and kind of now have that bowl shape. So now that I have the shape done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play around with some coloring on this thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select the object. And if you take a look up here on our tool options at the very top, this is kind of a quick way of looking up things. I actually use this a lot, especially if I'm doing just like a basic drawing. So I can click here to pull down my different colors. So I'm going to apply kind of like this darker brown color to it. And this stroke, I actually don't want an outline on this. I want this to have a stroke of none. So if I click here, here's all the different color options that I have. Or if I grab that top left one where it says none, it turns that stroke off. So now it's just brown. It doesn't have that black outer line. I'm going to apply the same thing to the bottom. So I'm going to grab that brown color. I'm going to click up here and grab my stroke and set that to none. And now it just gives me that basic shape. Now, what we talked about a little bit last week was just kind of like when we're selecting objects and moving them around. What I want to do is, these are 2 separate objects, but say I wanted to move my bowl, it's only moving that top piece. What I want to do is I want to make these things into a group so that they act as one piece. So what I can do is I can grab my selection tool. I'll click away to make sure nothing's selected. And then I'm going to click and drag. And see how it kind of shows that almost like tracing lines box? Here, I'll select it. Now, if I right click on it, I can group this thing. So now if I click on it, it acts as one big piece that I can just drag around and move in any position. The other part that's nice about this is if I need to scale it up or down, or say I want to stretch it out a little bit, it acts as one big unit. So far so good. That making sense to you guys? All right, so next thing I want to do is, let me pull I can just see the chat quick. There we go. All right, so next thing I want to take a look at is working with, now that we've seen kind of how this rectangle tool works, we can build boxes and stack them and add curves to the corners. Next thing I want to take a look at is the ellipse tool. And remember, what that's going to do is that's going to let us draw circles. Now, when I'm drawing these things, it's going to do 2 things. First off, it's only going to draw non-circular shapes unless I hold my shift key. If I hold my shift key down, it locks it into perfect circles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw an oval. Do that. And then I'm going to draw another shape, and I'm going to draw like a perfect circle. I'm going to hold that shift key down. Now keep in mind, as I draw, take a look at what it does as far as properties. Whenever you start drawing in Illustrator, it just starts working with the last set. So I have a stroke of none, a fill of brown. I'm going to try and make this thing look like a pear. So I think what I want to do is, actually I think I'm going to make this look like an apple first. So I think I'm going to do is I'm going to change my colors. I don't think I like that. So I don't have to delete these. I can just select them and change them. Or what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make some duplicates here. So I'm going to grab kind of like a nice bright green. And what I want to do is I want to make this thing look like an apple. So I'm going to take this one shape and I'm going to make an exact copy of it. There's 2 ways to do this. You can do like a Command C or an edit copy and a Command V edit paste, or there's also a keyboard shortcut. So if I hover with my selection tool over an object, and I'm using a Mac, so as I hover, if I hold on my Option key, you see how my icon changes there? How it's like 2 little arrows? That's how I can duplicate. And notice when I duplicate, it's showing me guidelines so I can kind of keep these things snapped together. So I'm going to slide this over a little bit. I think that looks good. And I'm going to make one more. I'm going to Option click and make another one. But what I want to do is I want to make a circle that kind of fits across the bottom of this thing. So how I'm going to kind of snap the same width of the top point and the bottom point, and it almost wants to snap them together. Now, this is going to kind of eat the whole thing, but if I cut this object in half, this will kind of act as like a nice base for that apple. So when I have a circle selected, we've seen like how we can rescale and resize and make it oval and hold our shift key. But also notice that this little thing pops up off to the right-hand side. We didn't see this on our rectangle tool, but this appears for ellipses. And what this does is this lets us splice the object. So this works really well for like you're making graphs or if you're making Pac-Man. But if you slide it all the way back, what I'm going to do is set it to 180 degrees, or as close to it as I can get. And now it just splits that thing exactly in half. Now, in older versions of Illustrator, I'd have to go through a bunch of steps to splice this thing and move it around. Now it's just got a tool cooked right into it. So I can take this, I can kind of slide it up to the side. And if it's not perfect, remember, you don't always have to use your mouse. You can use your arrow keys to kind of nudge things up or down or over. I think that looks pretty good. It might be a little bit big, so then I can kind of fine tune it. So if I need to make it a little bit smaller, I'll nudge it a little bit, and I'll just grab it and snap it right into place. So now I got this as 3 different objects. I got these 2 circles. I got this bottom half circle that is all snapped together. So just like we did before, once I have these shapes all created, I'm going to select them all, right-click, and make them into a group. That way, I can kind of start stacking them over. So far so good. That making sense? Now, say I change my mind. Like, I'm going to make a pair here. So instead of having my like 2 different green objects, maybe I want to make this all red. Because this is a group, notice it keeps all these same properties up here. Strokes, fills. So here, if I select red, it automatically applies it as a setting to the entire object. So now that we got that taken care of, I think what I want to do is I want to play around with making some like little leaves for this guy. So now that we've seen the rectangle tool, we've seen the ellipse tool, let's take a look at this polygon tool. So Polygon Tool works the same way. You can click once and it'll ask you how many sides and how big you want it, or you can click and drag. Now, as you're making polygons, a polygon should have different sides, right? It should be changeable, otherwise this would just be like the hexagon tool. So now, as I'm clicking, I'm holding down my mouse button, and if I press up or down on my arrow key, it adds or subtracts sides to the polygon. Also notice that it makes it a perfect shape. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a basic one. And then I'm going to grab to kind of bring this in a little bit. And again, the idea is I want to make this thing a leaf. So now what I can do is I can grab this and I can kind of start curving those edges. Or what I could do is if I wanted to play with them one edge at a time, remember I have my direct selection tool that I can kind of play around with my points. So if I wanted to keep my top pointy, but I just wanted to grab these side ones and curve them, what I can do is I can hold my shift key and I'm going to click on these 1 point at a time. I'm going to try and put a little bit of curve on these things. And by leaving the tops alone and keeping that point of the polygon, it's a pretty good looking leaf. So now all I need to do is apply color to this thing. I can scale this thing down. I can rotate it. Stick it along the top there. And I still have a stroke on this. I'm going to turn that off. And again, that's adjustable however I want it to look. So if I wanted to add more or less to it, or if I even wanted to go back in and adjust it further, I'm not locked into anything. Remember, it's all a matter of going back in with my direct select tool. And again, if I wanted to kind of make a little bit more of a curve on that, so maybe I really wanted to make this like a full leaf, like all the way to the points, or a little bit less, I can adjust it back. I think that looks a little bit more leafy. Snap it into this point there. Now I'm going to make multiples of these, so I'm not going to group this onto my apple quite yet. I'm going to kind of add some different spots here, but for right now I think that's working pretty good. So that's the idea of the Polygon tool. You're clicking, holding your mouse, and then pressing up or down to add sides, and then editing it however you see fit with your direct selection tool and regular selection tool. So far so good? All right, so next thing I want to take a look at is underneath this star tool. Same idea. Click and hold, press up or down on your arrow keys on your keyboard to add or subtract sides. What we're going to do is we're going to kind of make like little flowers for this thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag out, and I'm going to make one. And I'm going to set the color of this thing to white. The only problem though is that if I move, I'm not going to see it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add, let's do like a light gray, just so I can see for the stroke and edge of this thing. So that looks good. Now on the inside of this thing, I'm going to make another one of these star shapes. I'm going to kind of color this thing in yellow and kind of make this thing look like it's a little like flower on the inside. So now I've got another one. And for this one, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of snap it right there. I'll color it yellow. I'll turn off that stroke. And if I'm moving in detail, I like to zoom in just so I can see exactly where I'm at. I think it just works a little bit better. Then if I need to scale in a little bit, so I think that looks pretty good about there. Here with this, now that I have this connected and placed in, I'm going to set this stroke to none. And then what I can do is if I click and drag here, I'm going to select all of this and let's make that into a group. So now if I select one, I'll be able to scale this thing, rotate it, and I'll just drop one right there just so I don't lose it. What I'm going to end up doing is, now that I have some basic shapes made and I like them, I'm going to recycle it. I'm not going to redraw everything over and over again. I want to kind of maintain some consistency with style. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of build that right there as is and kind of work on it that way. So now that I have that done, next thing I want to do is I want to take a look at that tracing thing that we talked about, how there was that file that we could bring in and trace instead of actually drawing our own. To do that, it's pretty straightforward. All you're going to do is go up to your file menu, and we can either open this thing, or if we want to, we can just drag it straight in. We can import it. So there's a couple different ways of doing it. But what I'm going to do is from my file menu, there's a little thing called place. And I'm going to look for, in my downloads folder, was my lesson 3 files. There's my lemon. And notice that there's some options here. I can link it, I can template it, I can show import options. I just want to straight up place this thing because we're going to use Illustrator's tools to trace it out. So I'm just going to do this place command. It shows me this little loaded text icon, and all I need to do is click once on the artboard and it places it right there. Now with this thing selected, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at image tracing it, and there's a whole window for it. Remember how we had these panels along the right hand side? There's one built just for image tracing. It's really great because it gives you tons of options for as you're tracing it. So take a look. This is all alphabetical in your Windows menu. This is image trace is what we're looking for. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to check on this little preview box. And what that's going to do is that's going to show me, based on these settings, what it would look like. So for right now, this is not what I'm looking for. I want to take a look at color. It shows me like a really pixelated kind of jagged edge. So what I want to do is I want to kind of play around with these settings. Right now, my view, I'm seeing the tracing result, what it's going to look like, my mode's color. I've got all these different presets. Let's take a look at low fidelity photo. Let's see what that does. So I think that kind of gets it close, but maybe not quite right. Let's take a look. I got the silhouettes thing, and that actually looks okay for a shape, but I want to see it in color. And again, I have this whole advanced thing that I can click to pull down. So when I'm looking at this, I can see all sorts of different settings. I can change the color palette and how much it displays. If I wanted to look for maybe like a 3-color trace, something real simple, that's looking actually pretty close. Now, I can turn up the number of colors or down, and that's getting there. Now I've just got the 2 colors, white and yellow. I think that's actually looking pretty good. Now, I have my paths. So do I want more paths or less? I think I want less because I want this thing to be a little bit more simple. For corners, do I want a lot of them or a few of them? And it looks like few is probably going to be a little better. Do I want a bunch of noise or do I want less? So I can kind of play around with that. So you can see as you start adjusting these sliders, every time you bump it, it kind of gives you a different version of it. But again, this is way, way faster than trying to trace something like with the pen tool. It just gives you those shapes. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check this ignore white. What that'll do is it'll automatically add a transparent background to everything. So I think that looks pretty good. Now that I'm done with this thing, all I need to do, and it's automatically tracing it as I'm applying it. So it's done. It's art. Now what I can do is, here it is, but I got like this chunk in here and I got these little spots in here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit expand. And now what it did is it just converted this right into vector points. So I can grab this chunk because I don't need it anymore. I can select it and delete it. And now I've got my lemon. And maybe I want to clean this thing up a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play around with my path. And I want to kind of simplify this. I want to smooth off my edges and round them out a little bit more. So what I'll do is I'll go up to my object menu. And then I'm going to go down to path. And there's an option here to simplify. So this object path, there's a lot of different stuff you can do with this. And we're going to take a look at a couple different things of these over the next couple of weeks, like joining objects together or adding like strokes or offsetting. But what I want to do is I want to simplify. So what it's going to do is it's going to pull up in this little slider. And notice if I go forwards or backwards, kind of starts rounding off those edges a little bit for me. I think right around 17 points, that looks pretty good. And there, if I click on the little box there, it actually shows me the expanded options. Or I can just do this auto simplify, and it'll automatically apply it. When you're happy with what you got, you click OK. Now the only thing I've got left is I got these little like floating points in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select them with my direct select tool. Hit delete twice just to delete out half the shape and then the other half. And there we go. Now I got my traced object. So I can scale it, make it as big or as little as I want to. I'm going to drop it down into kind of my bowl area. And I think I'm in pretty good shape so far. So any questions, anything jumping out at you guys yet? Now I got 1, 2, I think I'm going to add a third thing. Remember we talked earlier I was going to draw a pair. Let's take a look at going back into our shape tools. And now that we have that, we see that that's pretty straightforward. Now when I draw, it's going to remember my last settings. But say that I wanted to shift it to that green that I was going to use before. And again, I want to make sure that I have an object deselected. So I'm going to click away to make sure it's not selected so it doesn't apply it. Now, before I start drawing, I'll select my tool. I'll select my color. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a shape up here, not quite a circle. I'm going to hold my shift key right underneath it and draw another one. And I'm going to kind of play around with stacking these together, kind of getting that shape right. I think this guy's got to go a little bit wider, stack up like that. I think that looks pretty good. Go maybe a little bit taller with it. I think that looks all right. Right click this thing, turn it into a group, and then if I need to make it bigger or smaller, I can adjust it right in there. This will be due at the start of next week's class. So everything that we're going through today, obviously like when I'm done, I'll have the video posted for you guys to review it. And then we'll go over output, all that stuff, and this will be due at the start of next week's class. So what I want to take a look at next is I want to take a look at importing some additional art. And there's kind of 2 ways you can do this. I can either place art directly in here like we did before with the lemon, or what I can do is I can go in and I can open it as its own separate file and copy and paste stuff out of it. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this artwork file as its own document. You can see I got a couple different pieces here. So what I'll do is I'm going to grab this, and if I want to grab something from one document to another, I can peel these apart. So if I pull the tab away, I can kind of just click and drag it over, and it drags and drops. Or if I grab something like, say this, like I got this inside piece of this orange, it's a big group, I can copy it. So I can do the Command C or add a copy, jump back here and do a paste, and I can paste it right in there as well. Now what I want to do is I want to use the inside of this thing and make an orange with it. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to grab all this stuff and I'm going to shrink it down just a little bit. And if I click and select over a big area, it doesn't automatically group it, but it does select anything inside that kind of like little dotted lines box. Now this looks like this would work pretty well for making like the inside of the guts of an orange, but what I need to do is I need to actually like drop it into there. So in order to do that, I need to have a shape. What I want to do is I want to make another one of those half circles like I did on this apple, but I want to do an orange one this time and then make this kind of sit on the inside of it. So just like I did before, I'm going to grab my circle tool, hold shift. I'm going to split it in half. I think that looks good. I'm going to color this thing orange. That's probably a better orange. And now I got this object and I can just set it here. I could arrange it and bring it to the front and make it bigger, but I still have a problem. I got this whole other top part of it. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to play with this stuff down here. I've got these drawing modes: draw normal, draw behind, draw inside. So I'm going to select this and I'm going to copy it. And then with this selected, I'm going to change my drawing mode. Instead of drawing right on top of it, drawing normal where things stack on top or in front of or behind each other. Now that I have this thing selected and copied, now when I select this, I'm going to draw inside. I want to draw inside this shape. So now when I do that paste command or command V, take a look. It doesn't paste the whole thing, it just pastes a chunk of it and makes it automatically act like a big group. So what I could do is I could still select the orange, or if I double click, I can still select a new piece that I made. So maybe I wanted to nudge it up or down with my arrow key. And now if I double click away and select it, it acts like one big group. So I don't even need to group it. I could just draw and paste right inside of it. So say I was going to stack that guy right there. I don't need this one anymore. And now what I'm going to do is now that I have all these pieces in place, I'm going to kind of play around with like how I have this all arranged on the artboard. So I'm going to set this here. I'm going to right click and send it to the back. Maybe I'll grab this apple and I'll slide this guy over here. And again, I'm going to make it look like it's behind the bowl. So I'll arrange and send it to the back. I'm going to take this lemon, slide it over here, make it look like it's in the bowl. I'll send it to the back. So I'm playing around kind of all these settings. Okay, so yeah, there's a question on the masking tool. We're going to be doing a bunch of stuff with masking, and that's actually going to be something that we'll kind of hit over and over again. This was just kind of a basic way of copying and pasting something inside of another shape by using these draw modes. But again, when we're using things like, so how you have text set here, if you had like big bold text, you could actually like trap an image behind it and make it look like it was just like a window, like looking through to a photo, something like that. So there's a lot of different ways that we'll be able to use that. So I think that looks good. I'm going to grab my pair because that was a group. I'm going to set it here again. I'll send this thing to the back. I want to put some of these leaves. I'm going to copy and paste these. I'll make another one and just kind of rotate it over here. I'll grab this one and throw it here. And I just want this bowl to be in front of everything. So I'm going to arrange and bring this thing to the front. And then here, if I wanted to like throw these different like little flower points, I could grab this and copy paste. And I want to arrange this thing. I want to put that little flower piece in the front. So I'm going to arrange and bring it forward. So again, this should be like that Bucks project that you guys did last week where you're just kind of taking different parts. And let me make it all the way to the front. So now that I have all those pieces together, now I can kind of play around with copying and pasting elements, stacking them all around, and arrange, send to the back. I can copy and paste multiples. If I hold my shift key, copy paste, and then I should be able to rotate this. Rotate it like 90 degrees or so. Send it to the back. And now I can kind of see this thing sits out. And now it'll act like one big object. So I can select it, group it. So say I wanted to like throw that there. Now, I have all my pieces, but overall, like this text looks super light. So what I want to do is I want to create a background for this. Now, there's no way to apply just backgrounds to your art. You have to just kind of create them using those shape tools. So I'm going to grab this rectangle tool. I'm going to click and drag. And notice I'm not going to the edge to the black line here. I'm going all the way out to the bleed. And I'm going to create a background color. And I'm going to do like kind of like a, I don't know, like maybe like a light gray. Oop, but I want to make sure I'm doing it for my fill. Now, again, it's just a stacking order issue. I can't see anything. So I'll right click it. I'll arrange it. I'll send it to the back. Now, one of the things you guys might run into is like when you have a background or like a big box that you drew, you're working and you're clicking on stuff and you're accidentally clicking on the background all the time. You can lock an object onto the artboard. So when I have this thing placed, if I go to object, notice I can lock this selection. It's still there, it's still editable, but I just can't select it right now until I go back up to my object and unlock it. So again, select the object, object lock, you can lock the selection, and now as you're clicking and dragging and drawing, so say that I wanted to move stuff around or rotate it or create copies or just kind of play around with like fine tuning how my piece looks. Remember, it's just a matter of locking certain parts, scaling, adjusting, kind of fine tuning. So there's no right or wrong answer for how you're doing this. It's just that you have those basic shapes built and you can kind of decorate or build this however you want. So when you're done, you're going to stop and you're going to save 2 copies of this thing. So first thing you want to do is do a save as command. And I'm going to save this thing off to my desktop. And again, when you're sending me files, because I'm getting so many of these things from so many different people, it's best if you save it as your last name and then a description. So like last name dot L3. I'm going to save it there. Click OK. And remember, I also want to get a save for web version. I did get a question about like sizes and when you're saving these things. Remember, if you're not seeing that JPEG, like somebody sent one, they said it was GIF because that was the default. Remember, if you click in this drop-down box, that shows you all the different versions. So I'll just do like a JPEG medium. Notice too, I can scale this way up. So maybe I wanted to make this bigger, like 1200 pixels. Because this is vector art, it scales up or down and I never lose quality on it. So here, maybe I turn my quality slider up a little bit if I want. But again, you can kind of play around with these settings a little. And when you're done, you just hit save. And remember, you're giving me both versions, an Illustrator version and a JPEG version. And that's it. So is there anything you guys want to see again before we move on to the extension project?
I want to see the tracing of the limit again. Or
okay.
Something similar to that.
Yeah, that's no problem at all. So again, first thing you got to do is, and this works with anything. So like I've done this with photos, I've done this with other illustrations that I've wanted to kind of like bring in and clean up. Say that you save something and you only have a JPEG of it, you don't have an Illustrator file, so you can't clean it up, you can't really do anything with it because it's locked, it's like a flat file. That's what this works really well for. So again, all you're doing is that file place command, and I'm going to throw, I think those are my downloads folder. Throw that lemon in there, and again, once I had this thing placed, it was just a matter of going to that window, opening up image trace, and with this thing selected, now what I can do is I can kind of start, make sure I got the right object selected. Once I have the object selected, then I can kind of start playing around with this. Now I got all these defaults. As you're working, always make sure your preview box is checked. So if you wanted to make it look like a photo, you could. If you wanted to make it look like a sketching, a 3-color, and that's what I ended up using because it was real simple. And also remember too, you got this little ignore white, so it'll automatically knock out the background. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to knock this down to a 2-color. So then it really gets me to a...
So if you have color into it, will the color appear tracing it?
It all depends on the image. So like when all this is doing is it's basically a filter. It's just looking at looking at it, and based on these settings, it's kind of guessing where the edges of all the objects are. But that's what you want. You want the edges because that's how it's going to build those vector lines. So how I kind of turned up my amount up or down. This is a general Adobe thing. This works in Photoshop, Illustrator, pretty much every Adobe software piece. Whenever I see these sliders, I just go left, all the way to left, all the way to the right, the middle. I kind of play around with them just to kind of get a sense of what it's doing. But also kind of visually, like as I'm doing it, I always make sure I have this preview box checked so I can see how it's adjusting it as I'm kind of playing with the sliders. So I think this one actually looks really good this way too. But again, as I'm tracing it, once I had this object selected, and as soon as I started making changes, it's already applying this as art. Now I can close this box and it sits, but I can't edit this thing until I hit this expand button. Once I hit expand, now it's going to act like actual art. So now I can go in, I can select pieces of it, I could edit points, I can start adjusting handlebars. So a lot of times when I trace an object, it's hard to get a perfect trace the first time. So sometimes you may go in and like add a curve to it, or click on a point and adjust it a little bit, or play with a handlebar. And then also remember too, you've got that object path simplify thing that you can use to smooth or adjust as well. That make sense?
Yes, it does.
That's a super, yeah, that's a super powerful tool. I use that a lot. I mean, that's just, it's one that like, it saves so much time. I remember when that was first introduced into Illustrator, like thinking, well, this is, you know, like all the work that I do, that was something that was definitely going to pay a lot of dividends for me because I spent so much time. Because in the past, like what I'd have to do is if I wanted to trace something before this existed, I'd place in the object, and we have a whole lesson we're going to do on this, but then I'd have to go in with my pen tool and I have to click one line at a time, and I'd get it close, but it was already off a little bit. And then once my lines were done, I traced the whole thing. I'd have to go back and fine tune each one. So you can see like this takes way more time than just using a simplified automated command.
That's what I'm used to, and I was just curious on this tracing.
Yeah, that trace thing, I just saved you a whole bunch of time there.
Yes, you did.
All right, so that's it for lesson 3. So I'm going to save this thing. So remember, you're sending me 2 files. You're going to send me your AI file and a JPEG version of this thing. And then the other thing we're going to take a look at here, let me close this, is, let me jump back into Blackboard, is an extension project. So what you're going to do is you're going to build a logo just based out of simple shapes. Now, again, this isn't anything like, I'm not expecting these things to be like masterpieces. This is your first try at actually like building something custom with these tools. So really the big idea behind this is that you're going to create just kind of some simple shapes and try and make them look like something that might be applied for like a shipping company. So what I'm looking for is that you're using standard shapes like square, circle, polygon, or star, that you're going to customize the shape using the direct selection tool. So if you're going to adjust points, if you're going to add curves to things, that type of thing. Okay, a question just came up about scaling an object. Remember, it depends on which tool you have selected. So if you have the regular selection tool, it'll scale the entire object. If you just have the direct selection tool and you click on a point, that's how you'll edit that individually. And I'm actually going to demo that in just a second as part of this. Another thing you can do is like, say you want to do like shading. So like here I drew like a little rectangle. I set it to gray. I arranged it behind. I kind of add some curves to it. So if you want to add like some shading or some shadowing, that's one way to do it. And then again, making sure you're applying a fill and a stroke to all your shapes. You're going to create 3 versions of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back into Illustrator. And I think what I want to do is I'm going to make a new document and make your artboards 3 inches by 3 inches. I want to make 3 artboards. I want to make 3 separate shapes for these things. And you can turn bleed off. We're not going to have to worry about that. So when I click create, now it gives me 3 boards to work from. Now I have an example of some stuff that I built, so I'll show you that, and then I'll kind of show you how I did it. Jump into my drive here. There we go. So here are kind of some custom ones that I already built, and everything you guys are seeing here, this is all stuff that I built using just basic shapes. Now there is some additional stuff that I've done, so like how I added like a shape and an arrow point and that kind of thing. We're going to take a look at some additional stuff next week. So what you're doing right now is just part 1. You're just going to build some basic shapes, and then once you have those basic shapes built, next week after we take a look at some additional tools, we're going to refine them down a little bit. So we're going to just start off with some basics this week, and then next week we're going to take those things and we're either going to scrap them and try something new altogether, or we can take what we've got and kind of fine tune it with those new tools that we've learned. So what I want to take a look at is just kind of building like a basic plane. Now, we saw just by using some of these tools here. So like what I'm going to start with first is I think I'm going to do like an ellipse tool. And I'm just going to try and build like kind of the basic width of the plane. I'm going to grab my Polygon tool. I'm going to click and hold. I'm going to press down. I want to make a triangle with this. Snap this here, and you can kind of see how it's starting to look something like a plane. And remember, I can always start playing with my by adjusting these. I don't like how when I built this triangle, you see how the base is kind of funky? I want to snap the base here. So now it's going to give me a little bit better. Stretch it out a little bit, rotate it a little bit more, kind of snap it into position. I'm going to make another one of these. I'm going to copy and paste this. I'll snap this. And again, I'm not really doing a ton right now other than scaling things down and just getting some basics in place. Now what I'll do is zoom in a little bit. So now I have my basic shapes together. That's always step 1. I'm not expecting it to be perfect right off the bat. I just want to get some basics put in. Now this probably still looks a little bit too big. So I'm going to scale this thing down, bring it back here a little bit. This should probably come back a little, probably be a little bit wider. This I could probably bring in and make a little bit more narrow. Now remember how we had that align tool? I'm going to click on that. I want to snap all this stuff evenly. So with all of it selected, I'll click on align. I'm going to snap it all so it's right horizontally aligned. I think that's getting pretty close. Now what I want to do is I want to start customizing this thing. So I'm going to put a little bit of a curve on my endpoints here so it look a little less harsh. Adjust this one back here. So now I got my shapes together. I'm going to select them all, and then I'm going to start applying some color to this thing. So maybe I'll do like a dark gray. Maybe I'll turn off my stroke just so that it's all one object. So now, just using a couple simple shapes, you can see how I'm starting to build objects. That's really the idea for this. So I've seen people like do different like wheel versions, boxes, trucks, all sorts of different shapes. And that's really what I want you guys to do, is just kind of play around with and explore. One way that works as far as like just kind of coming up with ideas for this is I'll take a look at like a basic. So like say I wanted to draw a truck. Well, I can, once I pull up an image of it, I can kind of start taking a look at like the basic shapes that are built out of it. And then I can kind of start creating some stuff. Again, I don't worry about making it look great right off the bat. I just get the basic shapes in the right place. Then once I have those done, then I can start grabbing my selection tools to move, shift, rotate, refine. And then if I wanted to, I could even grab my direct selection tools to kind of grab individual points. So say that I wanted to pull certain pieces in one direction or modify curves. So say I wanted to put like a little more curvature on this thing. I can kind of start playing around with that. That makes sense? So when you're done with this, same idea. You're going to stop. You'll save this thing as an Illustrator file. Now, one thing I do want to show you guys is I've asked you to save stuff as JPEGs just to get started because I want you comfortable with saving for web. But what I've got here is I've got all these different artboards. So I'm going to zoom all the way out on this document. So I got all this stuff, right? Some of it is good, some of it maybe not so good, but I'm kind of playing around with my shapes here. Now, if I save this thing, so I'll save this, so say this is my finished version. I'm going to save this onto my desktop. Last name -description.ai, that's good. This works. Now, if I try to save this with that save for web command, take a look at what happens. And I'm going to just grab, say, this guy right here. I have something selected. This is my active artboard, right? If I stop and do my export save for web, it only wants to save that artboard that I have something selected on. It doesn't give me an option to save all of them. I'd have to click on them one at a time and then export each one individually. I don't want to do that. If you guys do a file save as command, one of your options under format here is PDF. PDF is a universal format. This thing will open on any computer, any phone. But the thing I like about it the most is when I save my PDF, what it's going to do is it's going to use these artboards. So instead of me having to save 4 separate files, because I have 4 artboards, or for you guys, you'll have 3, it's actually going to save one file that takes all the artboards and puts them together in one big document that act as pages. So I'll save this thing off to my desktop. I'm just going to click OK for my default settings for PDF. And now if I jump back in, I'll look at my desktop to where I saved my file. Here it is. If I double click it, I'm running on a Mac, so it's going to open in preview. Take a look. It outputs each one of those artboards as its own documents. The other nice thing about PDF, take a look at when I zoom in. Do you guys see any jagged edges or anything on there? PDF is scalable. This acts actually just like an Illustrator file. Now, if I did that same thing, let me pull open this file. This is a JPEG. Take a look at what happens when I start zooming in on this. See all that artifacting? All those pixels, all those raw, rough edges? So that's kind of the nice part about working in Illustrator, is that if you save these things as PDF, it actually retains all that quality. So for next week, what you guys are going to be doing is sending me 2 things. You're going to be sending me your finished lesson 3 file. You're going to build 3 custom logos with just some basic shapes. And again, don't worry about getting too complex with it. It's just about getting comfortable with the tools. And then when you're done, you're going to send me that as a PDF so that I can see all of these. And I recommend when you save it as a PDF, double click it, open it in a preview program, or you could even open it, I believe, in a web browser. And you should be able to see all your pages as one big document. Any questions on any of that stuff? Anything jumping out, you guys? So what I'm going to do is I'll be hanging out in the room if anybody wants to kind of play through this and ask questions. As soon as the video is done processing, I will post it up to the assignments board. Otherwise, the exact same stuff that I just did is already available on the YouTube channel if you want to just watch through it that way. Again, if you have not turned in last week's assignment, remember I need the lesson 1 file saved as a JPEG, the lesson 2 file, the little fox thing, that's saved as a JPEG, and then that Bucks thing where you had to take all the pieces and assemble them back together using the alignments and rotation, that type of thing. Get all that stuff saved, sent over to me in an email. I know some people were using Blackboard to send it over. It may just be easier just using Gmail and sending it over straight away like that. But that's what I'll need by the end of day today. And then as I get that stuff in, I'll grade it. Usually it only takes me a day or 2 to get stuff graded. I try to get it done kind of during open lab time. But I will be putting stuff in the grade book. And if there's anything that gets graded, I'll put in your points, and then if I'm missing your assignment, I'll mark it as a 0. If it's marked as a 0, it's not because you're not going to get any points for it. It's just that that's what I have to do to show you that I don't have something from you. If I don't mark anything in the grade book, it just assumes that it's never due, or that you're not going to be like penalized for not turning it in. So that's just my way of showing you like I don't have it. So if you do see anything marked as a 0 in the grade book, don't panic. Just send me the email with the files attached to it. Cool? Oh, question came up about how I did this little shade thing. So on my objects, so say that I wanted to like apply like a shadow to this. Really, it's pretty straightforward. All I did was I took the same shape, and I'll do a copy paste command. I'm just going to set this thing to a lighter color, so I'll do like a light gray. I can right click and I can send it to the back. So I'll do my arrange, send it back. I can kind of set it here, and maybe I want to squash it down a little bit. And you see how I got this opacity slider? I can even knock back the opacity and kind of fade it out that way. So if you want to add any shading or shadowing to anything, that's kind of a real fast, easy way of doing it. You can kind of play around with your position, your rotation. Maybe I'll make this a little bit smaller. Cool. All right, guys, so if you want to dig into this, feel free. I'll be hanging out in the room if you've got any questions. Otherwise, I'll have the video processed and posted up to the announcements page shortly. Thanks.